Hey everybody, Professor Snart just checking in as we sort of pass through our midterm for the semester, or term if you want to call it that, although we move past our midterm unit. So it's Thursday today, and I'm just going to click into the due dates here to get the date right. So our next unit, the middle period, is due Friday, July 15th. So just a couple things about the midterm. Lots of really great essays that people submitted. Very well kind of planned from the get-go, good ideas, well thought out, well executed, polished, well organized, well sort of articulated, everything going on correctly. So lots of really great essays. And you would have received a grade back which displays as a % because it's a larger essay. It's, I thought, a little easier to read as a %, but is maybe confusing if it doesn't display that way. In the My Grades list, and here's where Blackboard is a little bit tricky, is I don't have access to like the student view of your particular grade book. I just have the full grade book, so things don't always display the same for me as they do for you. So if you are a little concerned that you got 90 out of 200 instead of 90% on your essay, which is, yeah, I get a tiny difference, feel free to double check with me. But it should display as a % with a % sign and a point value. So at least that's how it displays for me. If it's not on your side, then obviously that's just sort of a Blackboard issue because I don't have access to the student view of things. But anyway, the other thing then is, of course, to check the grade, but also to check the file that I sent back, which will contain some comments or questions or highlighting of some particular strong points or maybe some weaknesses. And often if the problem with an essay was basic sort of mechanics or grammar that were really, again, this isn't a writing class, so I'm not too hung up on what are clearly typos or just a mistake here or there. But if consistently throughout mechanics and grammar are really getting in the way of the ideas that you're trying to express, then that does become an issue, so something to look at. So I wouldn't have corrected or highlighted every example of that in an essay, but if within the intro and first maybe couple of paragraphs of an entire essay, I've highlighted a lot of those kinds of things, it probably means that throughout the essay, that sort of problem is showing up. So I didn't necessarily highlight every instance of a grammatical mistake or a mechanical error or an awkwardly constructed sentence or something like that. But I did comment within those files I sent back, so be sure you check those. Okay, so we move into now a unit that I think I say this about every unit is really interesting, although it's interesting for this sort of unique reason in that we treat what we call the middle period, and I'm just sort of reiterating what's in the notes here in the various, like this great series of trailers for this History Channel set of shows called The Dark Ages. And even that phrase of the Dark Ages, this is sort of what we're getting at in this unit, is that historically this period that we're looking at has been treated and called really sort of pejorative things like, imagine you could, you live your life but then find out that hundreds of years later the time that you lived in is referred to the Dark Ages and someone else got to live during the Enlightenment. That's like totally unfair. Like, why does my age get to be called something so negative? Or the middle period, like, well, it's not really the beginning of everything or anything, and certainly nothing is culminating. We're just sort of like hanging out waiting for the bus in the middle period. But obviously there are things going on, and so we can sort of challenge the notion that this is a dark period or a kind of middle or in-between period as an oversimplification that's useful for scholarly or academic kind of organization of time periods or literary studies or whatever the case might be. So I guess it's maybe ironic, maybe not, but that this period that we call the Dark Ages has produced so much that we now have access to that actually now lends itself, as will show up in the reading units here, to kind of modern reworkings or reinterpretations that often rely on, at least for the time period, really kind of cutting edge digital applications. Like, you begin to wonder if the middle period wasn't lacking in ideas, but maybe lacking in useful means or kind of exciting means for expressing those ideas. So of course they didn't have computers and digital animation and video game consoles and that kind of thing. If they did, we wouldn't call it the Dark Ages, I guarantee that. But you do wonder whether the stories they were telling and the ideas they were thinking wouldn't have been communicated differently. Hopefully you get the point. Obviously it's a facetious kind of statement. But we have, like for our Beowulf reading, a little clip from the movie that I'm sure most people are familiar with, the more recent movie, which takes the already kind of creepy Beowulf story and makes it like super creepy by presenting it in this sort of half-human, half-digital meld of things, which is just very unusual to watch. But it's sort of compelling for the same reason, because you're not sure, is that machine? Is that people? Is it both? How does that work? So the story becomes almost more intriguing because of that sort of visual style of its presentation. Another set of readings comes from Dante's Inferno, pretty famous for a number of you, although one of those things that a lot of people know about but haven't actually read, even just little pieces. It's an epic, certainly. But I provide a little trailer here from a recent video game, which apparently wasn't very good as a video game, I don't know. But is, again, sort of visually stunning in a way that just the text of that document maybe wasn't for a certain age of people. And I don't even mean the contemporary readers of Dante, but even readers that followed. If they didn't have sort of access to the greatness of that text, then maybe it's not surprising that it took so many years to kind of unfold as this really important, almost set of books. So anyway, yet another kind of intriguing unit because of these dichotomies that we run into. Last but not least is something that maybe nobody has heard of and nobody's seen, so one of those kind of rarities here, Japanese no drama. If you're familiar with it, then you know kind of stylistically what it looks like, but I've provided a little clip here so you get an idea. It's, again, just so fascinating to see this type of art form performed here, because I think this is one of those examples that's so far removed from what we're used to in the typical kind of Western tradition, even of avant-garde dance, if you're into that kind of, that kind of art. Even that doesn't really prepare you necessarily for something like Japanese no drama. Again, it just sort of, evolves from a tradition that's unlike everything that the Western canon is like. So it really can look like it comes out of left field, and is one of those things that really challenges you to appreciate it on its own sort of merits. So in other words, if you compare it to the Western tradition of what we're used to, whether it's epic characters doing epic things or lots of brash sort of in-your-face, over-the-top acting and emoting sort of thing, it obviously won't live up, but of course it's not trying to live up to that set of standards. It has its own set of standards. And this is why, again, it's one of those art forms where if you don't know the aims of the art form, it's hard to really appreciate it. So again, it's sort of fascinating. Even if you don't like it necessarily, we can appreciate it, again, sort of on its own terms. So some really fascinating readings for this unit, but also, again, that sort of intriguing way in which we can revisit ideas from a particular period and really kind of reevaluate the ways that we've maybe characterized or thought of that period or these traditions up until this point. So once again, lots to think about as we continue to move through the course. Each unit seems to present its own set of sort of puzzles or challenges or little adventures. Unfortunately, we don't get to spend a lot of time doing any of the one units, but yeah, it can get overwhelming, and you might feel this way particularly now that we're midterm. We've covered a lot of stuff, so you've sort of swum through a whole bunch, and now we're not quite seeing the light at the end of the tunnel quite yet, although that is coming. So you might feel like you're really having to work through the course at this point, which is okay, because actually we are getting closer to the end than the beginning now. Things do get a little bit easier maybe as they get more contemporary, although you might find that preconception challenged as well. So maybe the overall kind of point here that springs from this unit, but that's useful to remember throughout the course, is really to try to, not even to judge, but to appreciate things on their own terms without necessarily sort of evaluating them based on preconceived notions or a set of kind of criteria that apply to an entirely different tradition. Again, Japanese no drama is a perfect example of that. Okay, so onward and upward, and if you do have any questions, just be in touch and I'll talk to everybody soon.